Hello, my name is Diana. I currently live in Gaza City. When the massive bombings have started last night at 2 a.m., I was asleep and woke up in a scene of horror and fear.
Diana Shams is 26 and lives with her two young children. What she was hearing was Israel's military launching large-scale airstrikes on the Gaza Strip.
Rushed up to look over my kids and took them to sleep in the same room that we are staying in. I rushed up to take the phone to check on the news on the social media to look where was the bombing and if it's near us or in our neighborhood because the sound was really terrifying. I went and backed up my clothes, my kids' clothes, and any important stuff for us to be ready to evacuate in any moment. We had a sleepless night, a terrified and full of horror and fear. So we are praying right now that the ceasefire will come into effect again and these struggles will not repeat again and we will not live horror and fear as we lived for 15 months.
The attack broke Israel's fragile ceasefire with Hamas and killed, as of late Tuesday morning, more than 400 people. From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Colby Ickowitz. It's Tuesday, March 18th. Today, I talk with Miriam Berger, who has been reporting on the ground since the start of the war. I ask her about the devastation in Gaza and whether a new ceasefire can be reached. Miriam, hi. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Miriam, you're in Israel right now, and you've been speaking with people in Gaza. What are they telling you? What is it like there right now?
Right now, people are terrified and they're so tired. They're so tired from the war. These last few weeks have been extremely difficult because Israel has had a full siege on the Gaza Strip, so no food, fuel, or any aid has really been able to get in. And so prices have skyrocketed. People have no money and can't afford food. It's Ramadan, a time typically of fasting and community meals and celebrating, and it's been extremely difficult. And then this morning, around the time people were waking up for their pre-fast meal, the bombardments began. And people ran, they stayed in place, they huddled with their family, they just did what they, in that moment they thought they had to do to survive. I talked with one local journalist who, his heart broke as he sort of sprang into action and went and covered the bombing of a school that he said was housing displaced people. And, once again, he showed, civil defense using their hands and a phone's flashlight to dig out a dead body part, dead bodies all around. He's covered this again and again, and he just said he could not believe that this war is back again. I talked to Mirvat Mahmoud, and, she is just desperate to get her and her children out of Gaza because she's so afraid. She said she raised her children and doesn't want to see them die.
أنا ما بدي أفقد أولادي يا مريم، والله العظيم أنا تعبانة كتير، تعبنا، صرنا حسرنا سنتين وإحنا بنعاني، كتير تعبنا، والله تعبنا.
Right now the borders are closed. She has a brother who's severely injured as well and who needs medical care abroad, and he's been unable to access care. And they're just desperate. They say they're civilians. They haven't done anything to deserve what's happening to them.
بيقصفونا إحنا المدنيين، إحنا ناس مدنيين، ما لناش في أي شيء، ما لنا دعوة في أي شيء.
And no one knows where to go. No one knows what to do. No one knows how long this is going to last. No one knows how they're going to survive this, having already survived the first 15 months of the war. It's really a terrifying thought for people right now that they're going back to this horror that they had really hoped had ended.
Because Israel and Gaza have been under this ceasefire agreement since late January. Can you kind of remind us what the parameters of that agreement were?
Yes, so this was a three-phased agreement that was supposed to put a temporary halt to the fighting that began first on October 7th, 2023, after a Hamas-led attack on southern Israel. And Israel, in response, launched this punishing war. So the three-phased agreement, in the first phase, Israel was going to allow a surge in humanitarian aid and release Palestinian prisoners in exchange for Hamas returning some of the Israeli hostages that it had taken during the October 7th attack. Now, this phase was supposed to conclude on March 1st, and then the second phase, during which the thorniest of issues, which is the post-war governance of Gaza, was supposed to be hashed out. And this phase never materialized.
I mean, I have to imagine, Miriam, that there's no scenario in which Israel would be okay with Hamas continuing governance of Gaza.
There is none. And we're really at this deadlock right now. Israel has vowed to eliminate Hamas, and it hasn't. As it showed during the ceasefire, Hamas has retained governing capabilities, and Israel said that it also was regrouping militarily. Hamas has said that it would give up governance in Gaza under certain conditions, but it has refused to disarm, which is one of the Israeli non-negotiables. And other options, such as the return of the Palestinian Authority, which rules in the occupied West Bank, Israel has also ruled out.
So we're a couple weeks removed now from when the first phase of the ceasefire expired. What do you think it was about today that made Israel break the ceasefire and leverage this attack on Gaza?
So Israel's spokesperson for the prime minister's office today said that the prime minister launched this attack as a preemptive one, saying that they had information that Hamas was organizing some sort of attack on Israel. They didn't provide any further details about this. But Israeli officials told the Washington Post, some of my colleagues, that this was actually really about a negotiating tactic, about applying military pressure on Hamas in order to, restart the negotiations in Israel's favor. Domestically, Prime Minister Netanyahu is also facing pressure after he planned to dismiss the country's domestic intelligence chief, Ronen Bar, who had called for prioritizing the return of all Israeli hostages over continuing the war. And protests were called for today over that. So there's a lot of different moving parts and arguments and interests right now that, the various sides are trying to contend with.
Miriam, why hasn't Hamas released the remaining hostages that were taken on October 7th?
They're the bargaining chip for Hamas, and they know that's their strongest one. They say that they'll release them when Israel, complies with its demands, such as halting the fighting, withdrawing from Gazan territory, allowing a surge of humanitarian aid, ending the war, and also the release of Palestinian prisoners as well, many of whom were detained from Gaza.
And so this attack happens this morning. Has Hamas said or done anything in response as of yet?
So far, it's blamed Israel and blamed it for the renewal of the bombardments. There has not been any sort of counteroffensive launch. There's been no rocket attacks on Israel or anything like that.
And for Israel's part, is there a sense that today is just the beginning of more attacks? Is the war back on?
We don't know. Everyone inside Gaza really hopes that it's not. But right now, based off of the Israeli statements, they've said that more is to come. And so, the bombardments are ongoing, and we're not quite sure what's going to come next.
After the break, I ask Miriam about the likelihood of another ceasefire and about the Trump administration's prior knowledge of the attacks. We'll be right back. So, Miriam, the temporary ceasefire was already so tenuous. What do you think negotiators are going to do now in the wake of this attack?
Right now, they're really trying to push for a halt in Israeli attacks and for, some sort of at least interim solution. You have Egypt and you have Qatar, Saudi Arabia. These are some of the countries that have been most involved. The United States has said that it was informed ahead of time of Israel's plan to attack. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt was on Fox News' Hannity show last night as the strikes began to unfold and was asked about them, and said that Israel was consulted the United States ahead of the bombardments.
The Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America will see a price to pay. All hell will break loose.
And so, in the eyes of Palestinians, that also really taints the U.S. role in this all.
The Post also reported this morning, quoted an Israeli official who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they weren't authorized to speak to journalists, but they said that the U.S.-Israeli alliance was stronger than ever and specifically thanked Donald Trump and the White House for their, quote, uncompromising support. So I wonder what that says, or what you could say about the relationship between President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, and kind of remind us a little bit of the things that Trump has been saying about Gaza and the war since he took office.
So Trump has both pushed to end the war, but also has been extremely supportive of Israel and Israel's priorities. And so in terms of sort of his vision for how this ends, he's advocated for what would amount to the forced displacement of Palestinians out of Gaza. He says that it would then be rebuilt into sort of a Riviera on the Mediterranean.
We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
Which is an idea that's been roundly rejected by Palestinians, by Arab neighbors, by European countries. It is unclear to what extent he really means that plan in action, but it's been applauded by the Israeli side, who sees that Trump is really, working in their favor. I spoke to a man named Ahmed Kamar, who's in the Jabalia refugee camp, and he said that there was a lot of resentment among Gazans right now about the current American administration, especially in light of the statement saying that America was informed about these bombardments ahead of time.
لا أخفي عليك أن هناك حالة من السخط عند المواطنين على الإدارة الأمريكية الحالية، وخصوصا في ظل الحديث عن أن ما يحدث هو بغطاء أمريكي خالص.
He said that they're facing the specter of famine right now, that markets are empty and whatever's in there is so expensive. He said no one knows what is happening or why it's happening or what to do or how to fix this. There's just widespread fear right now that anyone could be targeted and could be next.
لا أحد يعلم ماذا يحدث ولماذا يحدث وما هي الحلول التي يمكن من خلالها التخلص مما نمر به حاليا.
So, Miriam, you're in Israel. How have Israelis reacted to the breaking of the ceasefire?
There's been sort of two ends of the response. On the one hand, there's been a lot of anger and frustration. The Forum for the Families of Hostages and Missing People has criticized the return to fighting, as they see that negates the return of more of the Israeli hostages. There's been protests in the street. On the other hand, this move has been widely praised by Israel's far right, who Netanyahu depends on in his coalition.
So, Miriam, we got at this a little bit, but what happens now? The ceasefire has been broken. What's next for Israelis and Palestinians?
We really don't know. In Gaza, there's already been one evacuation order issued. I talked to one man, Saeed Kalani, who lives in the north in Beit Lahia. And this morning, after the strikes began, he fled. He fled for Gaza City because he doesn't have a house. He lives in a tent in Beit Lahia because so much of that area has been destroyed. He lived there during a really intense siege that happened in the fall, and he didn't want to live that same experience again. So he went to go stay with a friend's house in Gaza City, hoping that he would be safer. I talked to someone else who lives in the Jabalia refugee camp, and he's living in a tent, and they're terrified because they know these tents don't provide any protection from shrapnel, yet alone from bombardments. And, he said that now that they're afraid of fragments falling on them while they're sleeping again.
Right. I mean, there was already these mass displacements that happened during the war. Is there anywhere left in Gaza for Palestinians to go?
There isn't. Nowhere is considered safe. Nowhere can guarantee them safety. And, it's also important to remember that Gazans can't leave. They don't have access also to leaving. There were some Gazans who were getting out during the ceasefire for medical care. There's so many who need medical care abroad since the health system has collapsed in Gaza. But Israel said that those too are being stopped.
Miriam, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Miriam Berger covers the Middle East for The Post. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. Today's show was produced by Rennie Svirnovsky and Bishop Sand. It was mixed by Sam Baer and edited by Lucy Perkins, with help from Rena Flores. Thanks also to Aaron Cunningham, Maham Javed, and Kate Brown. I'm Colby Ickowitz. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.